Once you're down, you're down. All right.
Well, that's probably why Westman gets down on the belly down there.
That's easier to do.
Okay. So this is Senate Transportation. It's Thursday, January 18th, 2024. And we're going to talk to about enforcement traffic on the state highway. We had Lieutenant Ravelin here with us this morning to just give us some trends. There's not a presentation. This is a verbal presentation.
Fine.
So,
I'm happy not to have more paper.
yes, we can just actually have a conversation.
I did that yesterday in institutions. It went really, really well.
Yeah.
Just free ranging, but within what we are tasked with, and it was nice.
Maybe we should do introductions just so that we make sure.
Senator Russ Ingles, Essex District.
Andrew Persick, Washington County District.
Jane Kitchell, Caledonia.
Colin Chittenden, Southeast.
Lieutenant Paul Ravelin, Vermont State Police, the executive officer of the Special Operations Unit, which also encompasses the Traffic Safety Unit.
And on the camera, we have Senator Moss.
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
And just sort of an introduction, what I've been hearing from constituents is that they have felt over the last maybe year, maybe it's been longer from kind of coming out of pandemic, but there's been less enforcement on our highways, that they see more speeding, more, and they think and maybe they see less patrol cars. And so that's what I'm being told. So I wanted somebody to come in and just kind of verify, is that true? Is that just a perception, or does the data bear that out? And yeah, basically that was the question. And are we seeing trends going one way or the other?
Yeah, those are all good questions. And we always say perception sometimes is reality. And prior to the pandemic, 2018, 2019, there were approximately 63,000 traffic stops initiated by the Vermont State Police. Post-pandemic, we're not near those numbers. We're closer to 25, 30,000. So there is a reduction in traffic stops. Some of that comes from what happened during the pandemic. There was steps taken during that time for force protection, which was how much do we know about this virus that's going around? How much exposure do we have? So our enforcement efforts were around unsafe motor vehicle operation, things like impaired driving, distracted driving, aggressive driving. So some of the lesser motor vehicle offenses, and I won't call them minor because there are no minor motor vehicle offenses, although that's referred to quite a bit as minor motor vehicle infractions. I will say the lesser serious ones were not paid attention to as strictly as they were, just because we're trying to adhere to the less communication, the 6 feet distance, and all that stuff. Right. Also, what came on is a change in the public's reception to law enforcement officers, and due to different events throughout the country, what our policing looks like. And then also with that comes the reduction of folks applying for the job and us now absorbing some vacancies. So it became this kind of perfect storm during the pandemic on policing as a whole. And we had to recognize what policing in Vermont is going to look like and what folks want from their police departments and from the Vermont State Police. So it kind of gave us an opportunity, but also a forced reset in what we're doing. From that is, how do we best utilize the resources that we have to be the most effective? And a big portion of that came from understanding the education piece and talking to folks and some of the other committees that I'm on. There's a lack of understanding of the rules of the road. There's a lack of understanding the rights that folks have, and there's a lack of understanding on what the expectations are of the police. So we were in sort of a transition phase, and conversations that we had within the Vermont State Police was, we went from 60,000 traffic stops roughly down to 10 or 12,000 during the pandemic. It was significantly reduced. And what did we learn from that? And then also, we don't have quotas. We don't have commanders telling us you must do this many tickets, you must have this many arrests. It's not that way. But what it is like, what is the balance? What results do we get with 60,000 traffic stops, and what results do we get at 10,000 traffic stops? And are they the same, and are they different? So the data showed us that The numbers are relatively close. We did see a spike in fatal crashes, which is a very concerning trend. That was a nationwide trend, and some of the other folks that I'm reaching out to, counterparts in other states, everyone's kind of trying to figure out where does this fatality trend come from. The whole nation was facing it, and there's this anecdotally, there's these statements that folks are driving more aggressive and they're less impatient, and we're seeing that in all aspects of life, not just traveling from point A to point B. So as an agency, we're trying to figure out what is the right balance for enforcement, where the blue lights are actually in your rearview mirror and there's an action taken on the side of the road. The education piece, how can we better educate folks? And then also utilizing the limited resources that we do have and carrying the 50 vacancies that we're currently carrying. How do we best utilize those resources? And it may not be a state police car in every U-turn. What we have started to do was look,
Senator Abrams will be happy.
seeing, reaching out to our respective barracks and say, what issues are you seeing at your barracks? And this is kind of like a coordinated enforcement area. We're calling them traffic education details.
There would be some barracks that have no interstate then,
Correct.
down in the Bennington, Rutland.
Like New Haven area. So, for example, we did a targeted education detail in New Haven.
Mhm.
We spoke to the folks there and we asked them, to the barracks, like, what are you seeing here in New Haven that may not be the same thing that they're seeing at the Williston barracks? And they're talking about a lot of distracted driving. So this past year on the evening of Halloween, just before everyone was about to go out, before it was about to get dark, we did a targeted detail on distracted driving, which also included the use of cell phones and electronic devices. So for a couple of hours, the troopers were out on the road pretty heavily. We partnered with Agency of Transportation to put up some messages on their message signs saying, phones down, heads up, and the focus of that effort was not to write as many tickets as we can. As a matter of fact, at a majority of the traffic stops, 90% of those were warnings, and there were 8 tickets for speed. But the point was the education piece. Here's why we're out here. We've noticed this thing. Do you understand that you're traveling at this speed? We're using stuff from the driver's ed manual to show you following distances and stuff. So we're using education material that they should have already read when they get their licenses. So the focus is now turned towards an education piece.
And how do those stops happen? Is that like a speeding where you're watching them go by, or is that more like you need to drive around to really see the distracted driving to see that they have some other device or they're not looking for?
It's both. So there's some of it is a roving patrol where the police cars are driving around and they're looking for these violations, and others are in a stationary position and they're seeing a person driving by with their phone, with their head down, or their phone up in
It's
their
on a
hand.
smaller, it's hard to see that maybe on the highway, but if you're on Route 7 or something.
Sometimes with a marked unit, with a marked police vehicle, folks kind of tune into that pretty quickly, and the thing will go down.
Even if you're not speeding, you slow down when you see the
when you see
car.
I still do. I've been a police officer for 19 years. When I see a police vehicle, I slow down in my personal car. But I drive an unmarked vehicle now, and I can't make it from A to B
Right.
without stopping somebody,
Yeah.
whether it's for
You would
speed or
never get
distracted
anywhere
driving.
if you pulled over.
If I pulled everybody over, I would never get to where I was going. But so it is out there. Again, to some, perception is reality to some regard. Carrying the vacancies is significant, and us as an agency trying to realize how do we best utilize these resources. So these education details are pretty significant to that. But also focusing on things like a major crash response team. So now when you see in the news that there's been a fatal crash, the team going to investigate that fatal crash is more robust than ever. We send a crash reconstruction team, but we also send a drug recognition expert as well. They get alerted and they go to the scene and they assist. And what we have learned from that is the solace that we give to the surviving members is that either A, this person was impaired or this person was not impaired. There's two sides to that. Like, their drug recognition experts are also trained to recognize maybe there was a medical condition that contributed to this crash. So they offer a level of expertise that wasn't there before. And the quality of these reports now are more detailed than ever. And what we're learning from that is where education now needs to take place prior to that crash. Once we get to a fatal crash, there's many events that occurred that could have been interjected at any one point to prevent that tragedy. And utilizing these special details and utilizing these special teams is allowing us to collect this data to see where we need to focus our attention to prevent these from happening to begin with.
Yeah. How are the courts working with you guys as far as to once you get to that point? Is the scheduling working well? And I mean, with the diminished force that you have, I mean, that's just times that you guys are elsewhere other than where you're in with enforcement. We're here starting to hear that the courts are backed up. I spent a lot of time in the courts in Orleans County, and I was surprised the other day to hear that they were in committees asking for more staff, and I hadn't heard that. But how is that working for you folks?
So it's unique county by county. Some counties are more receptive, more proficient in getting these cases through. Some of it is due to population, where there's lesser cases going through. Other ones, we have a change of policy, a change of philosophy on how certain cases are handled and where they'll be heard. So, for example, in Chittenden County, certain cases will automatically go to a diversion, which that was a change in process where if a trooper arrests somebody for driving with a criminally suspended license, or a particular violation with which is what I referred to earlier as a minor motor vehicle violation, that case, and they're arrested for DUI, that case may never see a courtroom. That case will go to a diversion. Where in other counties, those cases will be heard through the court system. So it really varies county by county on how receptive or how proficient these things travel through. I haven't heard that there's cases lingering for extensive periods of time saying I haven't heard anything. It just depends on how it's handled in the system.
But a lot of the ticketing and stuff, you've got the traffic bureau that appeals process.
For the Judicial Bureau, yes, ma'am. So there's significant changes happening there with e-ticket. So there's streamlining with that as far as a trooper pulls a vehicle over and issues a speeding ticket. And once they hit submit, that's an electronic system. So that gets submitted to the Judicial Bureau electronically. What we're seeing in those growing pains, if you call them, as we're changing from a hard copy ticket in a mail-in process, is this electronic submission. Is folks are paying those tickets relatively quick before it even gets through the electronic system to be approved. So we're getting notices from the Judicial Bureau that operator A has paid their ticket, and we just need that ticket submitted through the system. So some of that is becoming more proficient. I don't know how many. I don't know what that. Judicial will be better to be able to speak to that. But as far as how proficient it's becoming in their part of it, but eliminating the part of them mailing us booklets of tickets, us filling them out, mailing them back the carbon copy, and then them having to file it and get it through the system. I believe that system's starting to become real proficient for them.
And for you as well.
It is. Technology was some issues there. Connectivity, connecting from the vehicle to the server. They would stay open on your computer. When you open up several tabs on your computer, each ticket would be its own individual tab. And if we were not connected to network, they would stay open. The idea is when we came back into network, cell coverage or whatnot, they would all load up automatically. Well, technology and cell coverage was not as robust as it is. So we've recognized the need for a change. So we actually carry 2 air cards in our police vehicles, one for Verizon, one for AT&T, and that will require us better cell coverage. And we're seeing less and less of these issues. So yes, that's becoming more proficient for us as well.
This question is more from a municipal level, and I don't know how it compares to the VSP. You said that a lot of your roving is when you might stop or have roving around a certain area on shift looking for possible speeders. I recall at the municipal level, if they get a lot of complaints about people speeding through certain stretches of the highway or a street and somewhat close to residential, that the municipal level would then have targeted stationing by those streets just to sort of send a signal and sort of dampen behavior, especially during commuting hours. Do you similarly respond and have stationed or position your vehicles to look for speeders when communities that you currently serve and cover speak up and ask for such a thing? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
It absolutely does, yes. So for our response to community, that's an important step. So if we're having folks call in, certainly in areas that we're the primary law enforcement agency, where they're saying we're having significant speeding issues, we do have specific town contracts with several towns that want coverage specific to them. So that often happens on an overtime basis with a state trooper. For example, a state trooper may work their regular shift from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but then they may go to the town of Jericho and work an additional 4 hours exclusively for Jericho, doing all law enforcement there. But also our local station commanders are in contact with their local town representatives, that if they're facing a significant traffic issue, they'll put it out to their barracks saying, hey, listen, let's give some attention to this area. But again, it's kind of a pop shot, if you will. It's a reminder to the traveling public that we're there, but they're easily educated that we're there. And one of the best things that I would recognize when I was doing law enforcement was that if I parked in a specific area, folks started flashing their headlights to other drivers. And sometimes, doesn't that make you angry? I'm like, no, they're doing my job for me. Like they're flashing the person, slowing the traffic down, and that's the ultimate goal and why I'm there. So if I would go up and sit on Interstate 89, for example, by exit 15, the speed limit there is 55 miles an hour, transitioning from 65 just before exit 16. For the first 20 minutes, I could get traffic stops and make some traffic stops, but apps like Waze and Google will immediately, I would have my phone in my cradle, and as I'm doing my motor vehicle stops, I would look over and there's my signal that someone hit, that I'm in that zone, and alerting everybody that I'm there. Again, I'm not opposed to that because it's allowing folks to slow down, which is exactly what we're up there to be doing. But if I did that multiple days after days, within 4 days, traffic approaching that area would be slow anyway, because I know that I'm there. So it's a change up, but again, it's the best utilization of our resources. So when our barracks was full, it'd be nothing for me to go and sit on Interstate 89 for an entire shift. With less resources, I may be pulled to Jericho or Underhill or Charlotte when my time that I used to spend on Interstate 89 or in these other towns are just not there.
As a follow-up, and I love that you mentioned Waze, I always wondered if cops knew when we
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, being there.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the municipal level, we have purchased at South Burlington as a city councilor, and the communities really liked it. Those the automatic speed detectors where they say that the noise, those don't issue tickets, but there's
the radar feedback.
Speed feedback signs. Yeah.
So I'm curious if you use those, and then simultaneously from the Waze aspect, when I was traveling through New York City this past November, Waze, which I'm an active user of,
Yes.
every time there was a speed traffic camera, Waze would tell me, like, if you go through this red light, and I was even more conscientious because it kept alerting me that there was a traffic camera right there. And so I did try to get even as much as I was in a hurry and so on. Just, do you see merits in looking at those types of technologies to have the same effect that you were just describing, where you go to certain targeted areas to dampen the speed and make people drive safely, but to use technology to similarly achieve that same thing without having to use uniformed police officers?
Yes, so we have these speed feedback carts that are utilized. Each barracks has one of these things, and for many years it was my responsibility at the Williston Barracks to place the one in Chittenden County and place the one in Lamoille County. One in each county is basically how we have it laid out. And again, what we would see from those is for the first day or 36 hours, we would see those elevated speeds, and then they would start to drop off. And for the remainder of, and I would put it out there for 7 days. just to the amount of data that it collects and how to analyze all that data. Beyond 7 days, was a lot of data to try to put it into a chart and be readable and have everyone understand what it is. So within 7 days, you'd see the speed drop after 36 hours, and folks would drive through that area at the posted speed, or what we would often refer to in the traffic enforcement is within the 85 percentile of the speed. So road engineers design the road speed for 85 percentile what the traffic is traveling through at. So we would get a 50th percentile speed and an 85th percentile speed in most of the cars at that time. And we would get folks, for example, in St. George, there's a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit zone right through the center of town. And if you're doing 30 miles an hour, it seems like you're doing 100 miles an hour because the road's so tight in the living the neighborhood across the street from the store. So I would put a cart there, and the majority of the traffic at 85th percentile was doing like 31. And so we can go back to the town and say, well, there is a perception that the speed coming through here is excessive. 85th percentile of all the traffic is doing 31 miles an hour. So we're able to, not only as an enforcement piece, but also an education piece to the folks of the town saying, yes, like we understand that you're seeing that this is what you think it is. And yeah, you have the 1 or 2 outliers that's coming through at 55 or 52, but the majority of the traffic is doing this. So it's a huge tool for us to provide information back to the towns.
Yeah, that's good you're collecting all the data, because like when I was on the select board, we did a couple of them, but we didn't collect data. It was just, we were just hoping people would see it. And what the neighbors in the area that we were trying to calm the traffic down said that it worked for like 7 days, and then people just
ignored it.
started ignoring it. And then they said they also had some drivers that wanted to see how high the number they could.
So we call it the high score.
Yeah.
The carts that are utilized by the state police, we have the ability of shutting off however many we can set that. So if you're doing 10 over or 15 over, it'll go to a speed, but then it shuts off. So you're not getting the high score folks to try to be like, how high can I get
Right,
it?
because they would then take a picture of it.
Yes, social media and so forth. So, but to another point to your question, sir, is the utilization of the apps to alert you. Again, after my day's work, I take this uniform off and I put on my hooded sweatshirt and my cargo pants, and I'm a civilian traveling down the road to Maine and Massachusetts, everywhere, and I too use these apps. And yes, it aids.
Oh, but
in
it tells you of accident.
It does. So you get an alert that there's a crash up ahead, and then it'll show you how far back traffic has slowed down to a slower speed. That's a significant piece of information folks can use, because what we see during crashes is the secondary crashes that occur from the primary crash, and that is coming up on slow traffic and not realizing that the hazard ahead. So yes, those are all significant and aiding in what we're seeing today is folks are inundated with information, and oftentimes it's the fantasy football this or the news broadcast that or this. But if the traffic information was coming to them, there's a crash up ahead, there's a slow traffic up ahead, there's a car on the side of the road up ahead, there's a dead animal ahead. These are all information that folks can take in and then adjust their driving habits as needed.
So I love that you're talking about Waze, because I think this is really useful. And I'm curious, I was actually just told about Waze by my cousin who's a Burlington cop. He said, this is how I avoid cops. But my question to you is, do you, as the law enforcement, use Waze and what people are reporting about roadkill, accidents on the roadways to respond to that they're crowdsourcing? So you're monitoring that and then going to those areas to look for the car on the side of the road?
I have not heard, and I personally haven't used Waze in that regard. When I'm working, I use Waze as I'm doing my traffic enforcement. I'll have it on my cradle, and as I'm doing it and I look down and see that I've been made and that folks know that I'm there, I'll stay there for an extra 5 or 10 minutes to verify that I am there and folks see it and to see how traffic responds, and then I'll move to another location. And that's just so I'm, again, utilizing my time the most efficiently. If folks have slowed down in that area, job complete. If I can move to another area, if I'm doing speed enforcement, if I'm doing another type of detail where it's distracted driving or aggressive driving. We have certain times we get people calling in saying people always pass me in this area. So we'll go and see how that traffic is there. But it's some of it is what we call reactive. And that's really just analyzing the stuff that's coming in and then putting our resources there. And that's what some of these targeted education details were about. We're just reaching out to the barracks. For example, the detail in New Haven we talked about was a distracted driving detail. The detail in Williston was a following too closely detail. So in the safety corridor in Williston between exit 16 and exit 13, we have a significant number of fender bender crashes just due to the amount of traffic in that area. And the result of those are what we talked about earlier was the following too closely. If you're following too closely to the car in front of you and there's a crash or a thing that they have to change their speed or direction, the chance that you're going to hit them is pretty significant if you're too close. So we had a detail up there, and out of 48 traffic stops in 3 hours, there was 44 warnings. There were 3 arrests due to impairment and criminally suspended licenses. But the point behind that was the education
You
of
were pulling them over if you saw that they're
following too closely. And what we used as a litmus test for following too closely was the information from the driver's ed manual that explains what following too closely is. And they recommend 2 seconds is anything shorter than 2 seconds of the car in front of you is following too closely.
The car lengths too, it used to be.
It's at a speed, the higher speeds.
Seconds is better because it takes speed. So
Yeah, I suppose that's.
two lengths of a car are different if you're
What
going
I
10
find
miles or 60
amazing
miles.
is on interstates, people that'll change the lanes, and it's like, how do you reflect well? And how can you?
If you're not expecting it, it can be
It's
startling.
It's really scary. One of the things that I was gonna ask about, and that is just the experience, traffic stops are dangerous. You don't know what you're gonna be encountering. And they've also been kind of a topic of a lot of news coverage because of how sometimes people, particularly minority populations, have been treated or whatever. I'm just wondering about the risk that I know domestic violence call outs are really high risk, but I was thinking traffic stops pose us, I would think, a fairly significant amount of risk because you don't know what's in the car. You don't
So
know.
you could get your car, or you could get hit by another motorcycle.
Right,
Not paying
I mean,
attention.
all those things. So I was just wondering what has been the experience in Vermont.
So
And we actually have a bill where, somebody's put in a bill that traffic stops could only be done under more limited circumstances. I don't know whether that'll go anyplace, but I was just wondering what your experience has been relative to.
personally, we had the term routine traffic stop, and no two traffic stops are really the same. Due to some of the things that you mentioned, you don't know the vehicle that you're walking up on. You don't know the state of mind of this person. So for example, when I was a field training officer, I would always explain to the new trooper was that this person is speeding, but are they speeding to get home because they just got called of an emergency? Are they speeding because they just committed a crime and they're trying to get away? Are they speeding just because they had a bad day? They may have just gotten fired. Like why is this person in this state of mind speeding? Or it could be just someone.
Is it
I'm
aggressive driver?
an aggressive driver. So yes, the uniqueness behind each traffic stop is apparent to all troopers, but also we understand with speed. I've had my campaign cover blown off a few times by cars not changing lanes. Tractor trailers create a giant wake, and my cover goes flying. But we train extensively on all the things that we can do to protect ourselves, from how we call out the traffic stop to where we actually stop the car. So we may see the violation, for example, I may see the violation prior to exit 12 northbound coming from Richmond to Burlington, but I won't stop that car until we get all the way up to the Whale's Tails, because that's the biggest line of sight for approaching traffic. So it's not just a random spot where we stop cars or how and where. It's all planned so that we can offer the most safety. But it's also not just for us, it's for the person we're stopping. The thing that we have to take into consideration is that we are creating a potential hazard on the side of the road now. We have another car stopped, our car stopped, flashing lights. And if we have to get that person out of the car for field sobriety exercises or to detain them or arrest them, we now have pedestrians on the side of the road. So everything is taken into consideration when and where we do things for that safety piece, and we try to mitigate that as much as we can. Are they on the same risk level as domestic violence? Again, the unknown is the unknown. But that is a significant piece of traffic safety, is motor vehicle stops, that we cannot get away from them, they have to occur. And again, we do a lot of steps before that, training and purposely stopping cars where they need to be as safe as we can.
I would say Vermont State Police got a lot of national press coverage with the rescue of that child.
Yes, Trooper Archer
Oh,
and
yeah.
Trooper Cody.
It was on national news.
Yes, they were, there's no two ways to put it, they were in the right place at the right time to do
Just
some
on
pretty
a
heroic things.
routine patrol.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, very
So we have to move on, but, so just to recap the stops there, the stops did go way down during COVID as we expect, but they're on the way up, not back to that level,
And much more strategic.
much more strategic. So that, and I think that kind of answers that question. Are you the person that we would talk about other things, or are there different troopers or folks within public safety? Because we have a thing about car seats. And I think, although we have somebody from public service or public safety that's coming on that, we have a thing about speed enforcement with cameras that we're gonna wanna hear from public safety or the troopers on.
Yes.
And then there's this bill about secondary enforcement, and we would want your opinion on that, so.
Yes, so for the speed cameras, that would be something that I could speak to.
Okay.
I was on a committee that was studying that for last year. And then the secondary enforcement, which I was on a committee for the last 18 months.
Right, okay.
Reviewing Title 23. So
Okay.
I would think that I would be a part of those conversations as well.
What about the car seats, child seats? When you do a traffic stop, do you inspect for those as well?
So we ensure that there's, we ensure that the child is properly belted in and the car seat is utilized as it should be. And there's obviously a ticketable offense, but yes, that's a significant
So
part of it.
you're the person for that as well?
For me,
We
it's,
had somebody else.
there would be
that we-
somebody else. I'm on the enforcement part of it, so I would see that it's utilized properly. But as far as the laws mandating it and ages and size, that would be, I think, from V-Trans or State Transportation. There are folks for that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would be the
We did
best.
get a name for that. Okay, unless Senator Mazza, do you have a question?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Lieutenant.
Yes, sir.
That's helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah, very good.
My pleasure.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you. Yes, enjoy your day.
Thanks for what you do.
Okay, we're gonna move on to complete streets. And Kevin Marshall.
There is a plug right behind you.
Yes.
We're gonna talk about more highway safety later. Might be some connections between.
Oh,
the
yeah,
two.
highway safety trends.
Yeah. Which we got a little bit when the secretary did his overview. Yeah, he gave us some, so I think that this is just some more details on that. That is.
Good morning.
Good morning. You know everybody here, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Good to see you all.
But for the record, you can introduce yourself and then just tell us where we are with complete streets.
I sure will. So I'm going to stay muted. I apologize for that. I'm making sure that I get the technology to work here.
You just got put it on Zoom too.
Excellent.
Don't take it personal.
I
My
know,
fault.
I think it's something with the Wi-Fi.
Highway safety,
I didn't do
AOT. No,
This is,
that's, yeah.
complete
Oh, I
streets.
see that. We
I'm
know.
going to do my best to do this,
Looks like
get connected here very quickly.
Yeah, here it is.
Unfortunately for you, you see my wonderful technology skills.
You're an engineer, aren't you? Oh, could
Thank
you
you,
tell us
Senator.
what's happening with Route 2?
Route 2?
Yeah, the new section that's paved, someone said, I don't know, that there's been sort of some destabilization, I don't know, of the roadbed itself, but along the side, there was a section. Did you hear that?
I have
No.
You want to kill your microphone? We're not muted right now. I can see on the screen. Now you're muted.
Thank you. I was muted and then I became unmuted. Yeah.
So I was just wondering, had you heard that? And they actually had weird one-way traffic this morning. Yeah.
I have not.
Just outside of Marshfield Village.
I'll
toward
make
Plainfield.
sure to make a note of that, and whether it's Jeremy or Jesse when they're in to testify, that they cover
I'd
that
like
for
to
you.
know, I mean, I travel that all the time,
Right.
and it's something, you know, that, maybe the flood damage and
I
the,
know they're not done, like, they still.
no, no. I don't think it's the road itself, but I think it may be,
Shoulder work.
well, I think there might be some
Rest tempo,
erosion
and
or
then it goes
something.
full screen function.
From the, riverbank. I don't know. Anyway, they were out there this morning.
That was east of
Because it's a
mine.
PDF, part of the problem that I'm having.
Oh, yeah,
Tab,
no, it was, you wouldn't have,
full screen mode,
no, it's just really outside of Marshfield Village.
view at the top, there might be a full screen mode option, but
Oh,
There you go.
full screen, control L.
Down.
Down at the bottom, going down.
Good thing we got those exit bars right
this is awful.
Screen mode, control L, full screen mode.
There we go.
here.
Phew. I came in this morning for technology help. I appreciate that, Senator Chittenden. So good morning. Good morning. My apologies for the technical glitches. Kevin Marshy with the Agency of Transportation. I'm the Director of the Asset Management Bureau. And with me today are Summer Bacassi and Amanda Holland. You'll hear from Matthew in a little bit on Route 5. But I think it's
Route 5. Oh, on
on the Route 5,
yeah.
right. But it's worth noting, for those of you who've been around for many years, John Kaplan would come in and talk to you about bicycle and pedestrian and what we're now calling active transportation issues. And John retired this last summer. And as I said upstairs the other day, John retired, and so he did so much work that we now have two people focused on active transportation, both Summer and Amanda. Actually, I say that jokingly. John did do a wonderful job, but part of that is we recognize the importance of the active transportation mode. And so we do now have two people that are dedicated to it. Really,
Is that just bicycles or when you say active, is that?
when I say active transportation, it's so we're kind of rebranding it a little bit, if you will, and that's in line with what's happening across the country as well. We've always talked about it being bicycle and pedestrians, and we realize that, you know, we're now talking about e-bikes, we're talking about e-scooters, we're talking about micro mobility, we're talking about, you know, we're talking about people that may be in wheelchairs, those types of things. Kind of the active transportation mode is really about, you know, a lot more than just bicycle and pedestrians the way we've thought about it traditionally. So, and you'll be hearing more about it and be seeing more of the three of us as we talk about that mode of transportation. This morning, here to talk to you about Complete Streets. I know that we've got a limited amount of time, so I'll try to keep it pretty brief. The concept of Complete Streets, and there was legislation passed back in 2011.
I was here.
And so was I. And really, the Complete Streets is really kind of, it's about making sure that there's safe and accessible options within our projects for all modes of transportation. Certainly those vulnerable users within, you know, the bicycle, pedestrian, the active transportation mode. And it's really about, it's about a principle and a set of principles in terms of when we're looking at our projects, things to consider and not consider. Consider was a big word in that 2011 legislation. And so one of those things, I'll get into it, again, trying to fit a lot into the 15 minutes that we have here, is really about when we're taking a project, we're looking at the context. And that could be a bridge project, that could be a paving project, it could be a roadway reconstruction project, it could be a traffic signal project, is looking at the principles associated with Complete Streets. And you know, those are things like sidewalks, sidewalk ramps, pedestrian push buttons at intersections. It could be about widening a shoulder in a paving project, or widening a shoulder you know, as part of a bridge project, or putting a sidewalk on a bridge where maybe there wasn't one before. All of the things and all the principles associated with Complete Streets, the legislation was about us considering and thinking about it differently. The legislation, in my mind, having been in the agency over 20 years and dealing with a lot of the design issues, it just really formalized some things that we already knew.
Should be doing
That
anyway.
we already, you know, we knew that we needed to be doing. But we've learned a lot. We've evolved in the past 10 years. And one of the things that we talk about a lot today, one of the things about adding the positions is really how do we better integrate the mode of active transportation into our everyday thinking. We've come a long way, but there's a long way for us to go. Complete Streets is a set of principles that helps guide us to those kind of overarching goals. So there was the legislation from 2012, 2011, and then in 2012 was our first guidance. What you see kind of down at the bottom of the screen, which I started kind of describing to you a little bit, is those principles associated with complete streets: sidewalks, crosswalks, lighting, signals, streetscaping, pavement improvements, shoulder improvements. Could be just bike lanes. I'm sure in different places you've been around the Barry Montpelier Road, there's green bike lanes. That's a complete street type of implementation thing. We've done a lot better around the state on the state system, and some communities have done a wonderful job. If you think about the city of Burlington and drive around the city of Burlington, you see a lot of things that they've done differently in how they're addressing and looking at their streets for all users, as an example. So last year, kind of the primary reason for us to be here today is just to let you know what we did based on last year's legislation. And one of the things that was in the transportation bill last year was for the agency to create and make accessible to the general public the web accessible and web searchable data source. And so that was required in the original Complete Streets legislation. And so what we had done back then is we put together our guidance. We talked a lot about the Complete Streets principles. And what we were required to do is list those projects. And I'll go back one slide. We'll list those projects. We have a listing of projects annually that says, here's the projects that we did, and here's the Complete Streets principles that we included in them. And as you can see, it's a bunch of X's on a chart. It's meaningful. It kind of gets to what we did, but it wasn't necessarily, didn't go a little bit further and say, this is exactly what we did. So one of the things as part of this legislation was kind of push us in that direction. There's a set of, criteria that we were asked to include in terms of that legislation, get a little bit more description. So if somebody did go into our website and said, hey, what did you do for Complete Streets? You can see a little bit more information, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. As part of that original legislation as well was the listing of projects where we didn't actually use Complete Streets principles in them. And I'll talk about that as well. So what we have done and out on our website, and just in the interest of time, I may not be able to go there and show you all of that today. But what we've done is we've modernized the way, one, that we're taking in the information, both from our project managers and ultimately communities, in terms of those projects that are municipally managed, using technology. As you can see, that wasn't me that implemented the technology. I've proven that already this morning. But was coming up with a web-based form that can be filled out, and it automatically populates a database that populates this kind of dashboard, if you will, and that's what you will see, if you will, online. And what you see here, I know this print is very small here, and if we have time, I can show you the website. But what you have is a lot more information than we used to have. You have the project name, you have the location, you have a description of the project. There's a link, one of the green arrows there to a link, and I think you've probably all seen kind of our fact sheets that we have for projects, just basic information that's out there. If you click on any project, it's in here, so that if you wanted to understand not just what Complete Streets principles do we include in project X, you can also go on and click on and learn more about what is that project. So it's not just a name. It isn't just, Berlin and some number that doesn't really mean anything to anybody. You can click on it and say, this is a pavement resurfacing project. This is when it was built, contact information, and that kind of stuff. So that's now incorporated into our Complete Streets compliance. The box that you see off to the right, kind of over here, is, again, I've showed you those X's needing to these things. This is more information, and it shows you a little bit more about what we may have done with the project. This particular project that shows here, it says bike shared use path. Yes, we added lanes. Crosswalk, we added markings, we added signs, those types of things. So it gives a little bit more level of detail to someone who wants to know, what did we actually do as part of the project?
And you would only say what you didn't do if you didn't do anything.
So
You wouldn't say everything that you did do, obviously.
Right, right. The boxes that are grayed out,
You did.
this particular project, we didn't add lighting, right, as an example. And again, Complete Streets it's a suite of principles,
Right.
and I think it's important, and Matthew kind of drilled this in my head in the conversation the other day. There is no one complete street, right? It depends where you are. It depends on the context of where you are. We're not, all of these things that you see here, these different principles, you might be able to do them if you're talking about Williston Road in South Burlington, but you may not do them on Route 102 in Maidstone, right? So, you know, there is no one solution. It's about making good decisions and having the information to make good decisions.
So when do you do the explanation for projects not incorporating?
I'm gonna get to that. So,
Senator Kitchell, do you?
Well, I did because it seems like your risk is always greater in settled areas like neighborhoods or
Right.
villages. That's where people are walking, that's where people live.
Right.
And you've got a lot of, some cases through traffic, but you know, in South Burlington, there are neighborhoods where in fact speed is a real concern. So it seems like so many of these principles really, where you would really want to see them applied would be in municipalities as housing projects are coming online. I'm just wondering, when we look at the overall, how they get integrated at that local level. For example, out on Kennedy Drive, there's tremendous amount of new housing added. Are these principles being embraced in our planning and reviews on the local level as well? We're obviously talking about the state infrastructure, but I was just, maybe that's not in your wheelhouse, but it just seems like that's the critical piece, because that's where the majority of our people at risk are present.
So I think there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. One, I think in the majority, especially of our larger municipalities, you mentioned Kennedy Drive. I mean, the city of South Burlington, there's bike paths, there's everything along Kennedy Drive as an example already proactively kind of thing. And I've got to believe through their planning and their zoning and their permitting, connection to that facility is probably part of it. So I would say in general, I think a lot of communities are certainly have grasped onto the Complete Streets principles and are implementing them. And it's happening in our smaller communities as well. We didn't really think of it as Complete Streets when we built that little project in Danville Village as an example.
Where the sidewalk ends in a mud hole on
Well,
the
I mean,
road.
okay, so darn it, I shouldn't have brought it up. But
If you'd only put in 2 more segments, I don't understand why that didn't happen.
but it is.
But I'll tell you, years ago, there were sidewalks and a lot of villages didn't maintain them. They got
Right.
overgrown. And so it's interesting that we're coming back to something that, was 50 years ago. People did have walked more.
Right.
And how the automotive travel has really just changed so much. But so that's, the sidewalks really do make a difference, and people are using them because they feel safe.
It's one of the reasons why I love Newport. I mean, when you're not on a bike path, they have great sidewalks. You can walk everywhere. You can walk side by each, and it's safe.
And that's one of the
Yeah.
greatest parts about being in a village, is the accessibility. And so, but anyway, it raises the question, the extent to which these principles are sort of embodied in both state and at the local level.
I think certainly at the local level, it's there. It's definitely there in what we're doing on the state system as well. I mean, having been around as long as I have, it's an evolution, and we're continually looking for better ways to integrate it. What I would say though is, to your question, Senator Kitchell, is also it's not just the village areas. In a place that comes to mind for me when we talk about that, it's not just in the village setting of Bradford. It's what do you do from south of Bradford where there's some development, there's there's a grocery store, it's what do you do in that transition? What are the Complete Streets principles that we should be considering as we transition into there? And I mentioned Maidstone on 102. There may not be a lot of Complete Streets principles, But if that happens to be a place, there's a lot of pedestrians, a lot of bicyclists, a lot of recreational, I'm not saying there is or there isn't. There are small things that we can do. We can look at the shoulder widths, and maybe it's just adding a foot to an existing shoulder, but it's a principle and it's an investment that we can make. We can't always make them, but it's an investment that we can make to that mode. I brought it up upstairs the other day, a little controversial, but it's not controversial, but it's like, is it part of a project or not? And I'm going to get into answer your question, Senator, about the reporting for those things that aren't. But even replacing a culvert, we've talked about Route 2, replacing a culvert on Route 2. Well, maybe today, maybe we're not doing a full roadway reconstruction project on a section of that. But if we're replacing a culvert, let's think about what the length of that culvert should be, because someday we may want to widen that shoulder, and what we don't want is a culvert that's too short. It's that kind of thought process that is different today than it was before. I'm not going to say that lengthening a culvert is a complete streets principle, but it's part of the thought process. It's part of that awareness and conscious decision making on thinking about how we may invest in this mode in the future.
Senator Chisholm.
So to Senator Kitchell's starting question there, I guess I'd want to bring it back to that a little bit. Where I see complete streets sometimes hit friction is when it's the main state highways going through communities. I think of like Shelburne, they wanted a CFR flashing. So then there was like a V-Trans local municipality conversation. So in South Burlington on Heinsberg Road, which is also 116, speed, the community wants to lower it. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with municipalities when you're doing street design and we're hearing their priorities, and how does the price of the costing out? How do you determine who's going to pay for what? I'm sure that's a bigger topic, but any commentary?
It is, and maybe I can answer it briefly, but I'm looking at Matthew who wants to talk to you about Route 5. So I know you got a busy schedule this morning, but our project development process, well, it starts back in planning and it builds through what we're thinking and envisioning for corridors, working with communities. The RPCs, I can't state it enough. They are a tremendous partner for us because they're a lot of times they're that conduit from us to communities, and then also from communities to us, because we can't be everywhere and understand everything, but the regional planning commissions kind of help. They're kind of that glue between. So there's that, and that happens early in the planning, corridor planning. There's a lot of things that we do out there. Just specific to this mode right now, we have, oh gosh, you guys are going to have to help me. BPIP, bicycle
Pedestrian planning integration program.
bicycle planning, bicycle pedestrian planning integration project. We call it BPIP, and I always get, I can give you our acronym, but I know it doesn't mean anything. But right now, actively, and this is something that came before the committees a couple of years ago, we're working with the regional planning commissions to identify, the way I put it simply is the gaps and opportunities that exist out there, both on the state and local network. Not necessarily answering your question. Once we get to the project development process, there's a lot of interaction. Depending on the scope of the project, a paving project, we're not going to have 9 different community meetings to talk about the scope of a project, but we reach out to the community, we ask them what they need. I'm the chair of the select board of my little town, and their V-Trans is paving through there, and in a couple of weeks, we've got a meeting with their designers to say these are the things we're thinking about in our community. So we reach out. There's a lot of outreach. So the final decision is difficult, right? Because we can't build the Cadillac every time we go somewhere, and that isn't just about bicycle and pedestrian. That's about our treatments. There's roads out there that we'd love to go down 4 feet and replace the sub base, but it's going to be $5, $6, $8 million a mile. But instead, we only have the funding to put down 1.5 inches of pavement. So there's the balance and the trade-off. I'm not giving you a great answer because I could talk for 2 hours about that, but there's a lot of back and forth. And at the end of the day, we try to do the best we can to integrate these things when we can.
Okay.
I may just, the only other, well, you had asked the question about the things that we don't do. That's also, there's a tab on this website that you go to about the projects where I think we list them as exemptions, and there were 3 exemptions in the initial language. One of those was there's places where bicycle and pedestrians are prohibited, the interstate as an example. So if we're paving on the interstate, no, we're not going to be looking at complete streets principles. There is one that gets a lot of attention, which is if it's cost prohibitive, to your question, Senator, that's a balance and we look at it. But if we're doing just an inch and a half of paving on a project and there's a 1 foot shoulder there today, what we look at is, can we get another foot or two? But in some cases, it may be the ideal is 4 or 5 feet wide, but you start going from a project of $500,000 a mile to $1 million a mile, whatever that is, to get those couple of extra feet. Sometimes it is cost prohibitive given the scope of the project. And then the third one is outside the scope of the project, which is, and I already mentioned the culverts. It's not like we're going to be doing all the principles associated with installing a culvert. However, we do look at it, and that's a mindset. That's kind of the change in the mindset that I mentioned from 2011 till
So
today.
the main thing on complete streets is that this update is done now, or is it still,
So this is out there.
that's under there, but just the update of the non-guidance.
So the guidance, and again, I could talk for another 15 minutes on this, but one of the things that we've done, and all three of these folks were involved, I think Matthew led the effort, is we've updated our complete streets guide from 2012 to today.
Was that part of one of the T-bills, or you guys are?
I don't
doing
believe
it?
that was not required as part of the
Maybe
transportation
you guys
bill.
said you were doing it anyway.
Yeah, we are doing it. It's not, we're working through a final few pieces of, it's all out there, it's approved, the document. We're just getting the final improvements, and we'll be putting it on the website here in the near future.
And this is some of that work go into the design standards that AOT is doing, because like.
They work together. I think Aaron may have been in here last
Yeah.
week talking to you about this design standards. It all fits together, right? You know, the design standards, if you will, multimodal guidance, I think we're calling it now. It is a little bit of that overarching. The complete streets principles get fit into that decision-making lens, you know.
Okay.
So I'll leave it at that, because I know you're limited for time.
I think that was the main thing, because we knew you were updating the guidance.
Yes.
Like you've updated it, you have more staff, that's good to
Yeah.
work on these things. But yeah, I think it comes up when there's a local project and they really want a bike lane or an extra 2 feet. And V-Trans says, sorry, we're not doing it. People complain, no, you're not following complete streets or something.
We're having discussions right now. You mentioned 116, there's a paving project coming through. It's a balance, and we do the best we can to thread the needle, from safety, from cost, safety for all users, accommodating all users. And at the end of the day, I think we do, well, I know we do much better today than we did when I started 20-something years ago, but there's still opportunities to do better, for sure.
I think there's a perception that complete streets means that you have to do it. So if you don't do it, they say, oh, you're not following complete streets, but that's a
Yeah.
misconception of what it means.
And I know Amanda, but agreed, and the way I kind of think about it, and it's one thing to say we want all of these things. It's another thing when we're managing an entire network with a limited budget, right? It's kind of like building a house. There's a lot of things that you may want, but you may have to make some concessions. And I'm not saying that's what we want to do, but when we're looking across the network, there's times where the projects, the 116s, that maybe you could invest $3 million more.
This is very relevant
That,
to the two of us around appropriations.
right, well, there may be the project where you say we could, if we wanted to build out all complete streets principles, it might be $3 million more on that project. And someone may say you have a huge robust budget, why can't you do it? But that may be an entire another paving project. So if we can get an incremental benefit on the project with $500,000, but it still allows us to afford making an incremental benefit on another project, that's the trade-off, and that's the balance that we're faced with in trying to manage the entire network.
I don't want to necessarily drag this out, but one last final comment. I would just say it would be helpful for me to know what your appeal process is, because I feel like when these issues are raised to me, I'm getting up to speed quickly, and I'd love to know if there's an alternative track when communities are in disagreement with V-Trans, and any documentation on what steps they should take before they start calling their senators and get us involved, if that makes sense.
Not really an appeals process.
Yeah.
What we do is we have our project development process. We have a project manager. Been through these.
Really is the best thing. It's kind of hard to change it when they're gonna start paving next summer, and then now they want to change it.
That's an excellent point. That's, again, I could talk a lot about how we're trying to engage communities sooner so that and that's part of the BPIP, the integration project is we're trying, through our regional planning commissions, we're trying to get towns to identify what their thoughts are.
And
what
make
their
sure
needs
they have somebody on the transportation,
Right.
transportation.
Yeah, so there's not any official appeal process. Unfortunately, hopefully, there's good communication, and a lot of times we are able to thread the needle if we know what's needed sooner. But sometimes we get to that point where we've been designing a project for 5 years and it's getting ready to go out, and the community says, "Hey, we'd really like this." It's like,
Should have said that a couple years
yeah.
ago.
I'm sorry, Amanda, did you have something as I pack up? And
Sure.
if you could introduce yourself.
Amanda Holland with V-Trans. I just wanted to make one more point, because everybody's slides in there that he didn't get to. We just had 2 slides that gave an update on. There will be in the, coming out both after we do internal trainings on our complete street guidance, there will be external trainings with municipalities. That does get back to a little bit of Lucy first in making sure that municipalities are.
Right, because they might not have the expertise of the staff, so it's great that you're doing that.
Thank you. I forgot that. Sorry, Matthew, that's your time. Thank you.
We didn't get you on in time, so.
Yes, you're a little behind.
Thank you all.
No, thank you, that's good to know, good update.
So you're still in Chelsea?
Yes. Yes, I made the mistake of getting on the select board.
Yeah.
Who's their home community?
Yes, we were all doing last January, yes. Not a lot of institutional
That's
knowledge.
happening in one of my towns.
Yeah, it was tough.
Matthew.
Yeah, good morning, Senators. My name is Matthew Arancio. I'm a planning manager in our Policy Planning and Intermodal Development Division of Agency of Transportation. Some of the programs I oversee are the Transportation Planning Initiative, Better Connections, and any number of different other ad hoc things that come up along the way. And included in that is this study that I was tasked with my colleague Lauren Masseria to implement. I realize that Kevin's a tough act to follow, and I'm pushing up against a break here between which will be followed by a long morning for you all. So I'll be brief. The purpose of this survey rather, was to gauge community interest along the Route 5 corridor in a future planning effort. This survey took place from mid-October to mid-November of this year. We surveyed the 30 communities, the 30 municipalities that were along the Route 5 corridor and the 4 RPCs.
You only have 50 slides.
Oh, we only have 50 slides. Yeah, so there's a lot of appendices in this document. So just after giving you the context for the survey, I'll walk you through what you can find in this document and get to the punch of all of this. So like I said, this response to this legislative request to undertake this survey, to cut to the chase and to provide a map of just how the responses went. You can see here that most of the communities along the corridor did participate in the survey. 23 of the 30 communities on the corridor and 3 of the 4 RPCs.
Was it like a web-based, like you sent them a link?
Yes, it was. It was web-based, and in addition, we did provide opportunities for hard copies if there were communities that did request it. And in terms of the voting on this, or in terms of the responses of these surveys, we asked each RPC to respond with 1 response, and then we asked each community along the corridor to have 2 responses. So 1 from their select board chair and 1 from their planning commission chair, to get both perspectives from a planning and project perspective on this. Long story short, 100% of the respondents to this survey supported the idea of undertaking a future planning study along the Route 5 corridor to implement some sort of bike corridor, both either on or off the corridor. And so again, that's a resounding number. 100% of participants said yes, they wanted to undertake a survey.
Did you get it? So
Like 36 people.
36 respondents.
Mm-hmm. So that was, like I said, I believe it's 21 of the 30 towns, and 3 of the 4 regional planning commissions. And
Which planning commission did not, because the language required the involvement of the planning commissions, and we told that they were all on board.
right.
So what happened with this?
That's a good question. We can certainly follow up with the planning commission. It was Wyndham Regional Commission that did not respond, but we're happy to follow up with them and get additional information.
Certainly would want to know if it's NVDA.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of think of it as a Southern Vermont initiative. I don't know why, maybe that's the impression I got, but I'm surprised that Wyndham is the one that did.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we did, apart from this 1 yes/no question, we did ask some qualitative questions as well in terms of how important was this on the corridor, to rate bicycling conditions as well. These data points and others can be found in the appendices of the document that we've shared with both the House Transportation Committee and the Senate Transportation Committee here today. That's part of the 50 pages that you alluded to, sir. So that's the long and the short of it is we had 100% yes, and now put this back in the, into the ether for further conversation just about how to proceed.
One of the things that is so difficult is getting back to the conversation we had with Kevin. I would say yes, it sounds very intriguing, and yes, it seems like it would be a good idea. And so we get this all the time. I would support this particular program, this particular service, but it's only in isolation with what would it take to cost? What would be the balance? What would be the impact on the rest of the transportation? I have no idea. My assumption, just looking at what we did with the Laurel Valley Rail Trail, something comparable for this length, where you're not even dealing with a state-owned asset necessarily, it is going to be very significant in terms of the cost. And what is that cost benefit, and what would it mean relative to the funds not available for the rest of the entire statewide transportation infrastructure? So, it's nice to say, I support it, but with that, would you support it if in fact it meant less funding for XYZ? Or what would be the price tag? Or would you support it if you had to, pay an extra fee or a tax or whatever? So that's my only comment. We get this all the time. Our surveys show X% of people support it, and it's easy to say, sure, I support it. But would you support it if it meant taking money away from this? You might say, well, no. So I'm glad we've got the support to look at it. I'm just saying, I haven't got a clue what a project of this magnitude, or whether you can chunk it out and look at segments that would make sense. So I guess this is just the preliminary, but that's kind of my response in terms of, what you got for information.
And to add to that, Senator Kitchell, you have 105,254 people along this route, and you have 36 responses. And so how much weight does 36 responses carry to even further even the study even further? I mean, spending $100,000 to do a study or whatever the study is, I mean, yeah, I agree. It's a great idea. It's great. I am a huge supporter of the rail trails and what they've done, but it just doesn't seem like it's a overwhelmingly supported idea when you have 36 people respond. Of course, they're 100%, but that's one group.
Well,
They were elected.
They are elected, so they
A little
do
bit, but I get the point, I think.
And the other part too that I think we're getting into, and we're getting had a funding request from the Trail Network saying, well, this is more than our volunteers can support. We need financial support from the state for trail maintenance. So it's not just the creation of it, but what would it take for state resources if in fact you were to create it? Then you've got to maintain it, and you've got to really look at how you, the extent to which you have the volunteer support versus whatever. I'm only raising this because obviously so much of what you like to do represent. You have to really think about what are you obligating yourself to, and so I'm just saying, as we consider this out into the future, then it's not necessarily the merits. It will be what are those other collateral impacts that come with it. And to me, that's part of what we have to do when we're making decisions here. So I know we gave you the assignment.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with you.
No, absolutely.
In a personal sense, it's just sort of like, yes, this has been put forward. I've heard from one town that really thinks it's a wonderful idea, and I would not disagree with that. It's just, what are those fiscal implications, not only for the development, the construct, but also the ongoing maintenance of a very large trail system that. And I guess I'm feeling it even more because we know our transportation fund is anemic and it's not gonna get better. And so that's the fiscal reality in which we're, looking at this.
So just to wrap this up, there is a recommendation to do some continuing steering committee. Is that something the AOT is doing, or is that just something that they hope somebody else does?
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that up. So just to kind of conclude here, these next steps are really just to continue this conversation in light of what Senator Kitchell brought up in terms of these factors that are complicating to say the least and warrant further investigation, at least in terms of the scale of the corridor and the complexity of the corridor. And so what we tried to do here was just offer up some information about starting that conversation that if there is interest in how to proceed with this, there are some possible options already existing within our planning wheelhouse. Kevin mentioned corridor planning, for example, some of those efforts underway, assessment of existing conditions, comparison with prioritization of existing projects, and strategically thinking about how to take bites out of this might be one example. This next step section is really just meant to start that conversation and just allude to these efforts. And then in terms of that steering committee, that's a subsequent clause to the planning effort, right? So if a planning study is to be undertaken, if that's deemed the course of action here, definitely some sort of steering committee drawing upon, the folks that we reached out to already, as well as additional partners within and outside the agency seems to make sense.
Yeah, well, look at the St. John's Break comment, but it's not the top priority. So that's an indication of how people are weighing.
Right.
And yeah, obviously different.
So right now AOT is, other than just regular planning, corridor planning, complete streets planning, all that, AOT isn't doing another step, but basically putting this out there to our RPCs in those towns along the route saying, people want to do something that we're interested in talking about it.
We want to bring this information to you all and then also to share it with the RPCs exactly to continue this conversation moving forward. And yes, so our effort, at least for the moment, concludes with this survey, sharing this information in this survey. If I could just provide a brief plug, there's a lot of information in the appendices here in terms of the responses, both in terms of individual comments, areas and destinations of interest, and just trying to gather that qualitative evidence, just to at least have some baseline information to make a decision.
So when you're building a
here.
highway, you have an estimated cost per mile. What would be obviously the price tag if you were to say, what's this project, what does it represent?
Honestly, and I say this respectfully, I could not even begin to quantify
Millions of
that.
dollars.
It would be quite expensive, is my best guess. So,
Right, because it depends on what it is. Is it a new lane, or is it paint, or is it, just making the shoulder wider and signs?
And the ask of this was to assess both on and off roadway options, right? Or some sort of bicycle corridor that would be linked in those components, right? Perhaps on roadway and locations and off roadway. And so even thinking about that complexity compared to the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, which was just one line, right? So it begs a lot of this survey and the responses to this survey begs a lot more questions to be further studied and evaluated as part of this decision process.
NVDA would have obviously a better sense of that because that's why AOT is now to take it over because, the construction and whatever was much more than could ever have been done by, by VAST, a volunteer organization. So, would be somewhat illustrative of what it is.
Well, thank you, Matthew. That's good.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah. It is disappointing when I can see them.
Yeah, especially that part.
Noise came from there.
Yeah,
As you pointed out.
Okay, so with that, thank you guys. Yeah, we're gonna take a break. Is Bill 10:30 still fine?
Yeah, sure.
So 10:30 we'll come back and